Hey guys, Arjafantes here with another Prismata gameplay analysis. And today I'm bringing you a tournament match I played against Elyot in the Scorchilla Cup, which is an invite tournament for the top 16 ladder players. And in this particular match, I won the first game with a very interesting strategy, and that's the game I'm going to be analyzing today. The second game, I made a critical blunder in the mid-game, which allowed Elyot to win. And the third game, Elyot just thoroughly outplayed me, so he won the series, and very well played by him. But I just want to show something interesting for the very first game. So first, if we look at the set, we see there's Shadowfang, which is a highly efficient attacker. And there's also Frostbite, which is a very good unit to pair with Shadowfang. You can freeze walls, and then threaten just massive amounts of damage upon breach with a Shadowfang. There is also Venge Cannon, however, and Venge Cannon is kind of a counter to Shadowfang Frostbite, due to the fact that Venge Cannon also threatens a lot of damage at the cost of your economy, since you have to sacrifice 3 drones, and it also isn't vulnerable to Frostbite because it has high health. So in a Shadowfang versus Venge Cannon mirror, the Venge Cannon should just win, provided you start storing green early enough to get the Venge Cannons. So in this match, something very interesting happens. Elyot starts her own drone, but I go drone and pass the turn. So why did I go drone? Well, I have exactly 8 drones, which means next turn I'll be able to produce 8 gold, and I have 4 gold stored. What this means is I'll have exactly 12 gold on the next turn, and I can threaten to go double Animus, an extremely aggressive play that would let me get a Shadowfang on turn 3, and then Shadowfang Frostbite on turn 4, and just immediately threaten to crush my opponent. So this makes Elyot think for a very long time. He actually uses half of his time bank on his second turn, and finally he decides to go Drone Conduit. So he's obviously planning on going Venge Cannon in order to counter my Shadowfang all-in. And you know, that is the correct response to the Shadowfang. So seeing the fact that he does this though, I just go double drone into Animus, and the reason here is, if I were to carry out the Shadowfang attack, I believe Elyot would just win, because he'd be able to get out a Venge Cannon, and then eventually just kill all my Shadowfangs before I can kill his Venge Cannons. So rather than following through with the all-in, I decide to work on my economy a little bit, and then also get some tech structures. Now we're in a very interesting position. I'm actually kind of ahead on econ still, since he matched my single drone turn with also buying a single drone. So we're sort of even on that front. However, I forced my opponent to commit to green, and that's a pretty big deal. The green in the set's not actually great, except for Venge Cannon. But if he does decide to go for like a Venge Cannon all-in, it's actually pretty easy to defend as long as I know it's happening. So I kind of pushed my opponent into a color by doing my little Gambit. And I sort of have the flexibility of still choosing whether or not I want to go for the Shadowfangs. And my opponent decides at this point that he already committed to the green, so might as well just commit to the Venge Cannon all-in. And I mean, it's possible to still tech out of the green into like blue or red or something like that, but it is a bit costly since he already invested in the first conduit, which is why he decides to go for it. Seeing that, I actually get a Blast Forge, and the reason I get the Blast Forge is if you were to just build a Venge Cannon this turn, he'd be able to do a lot of damage, so I wanted to have the opportunity to buy a wall. And eventually I would need the blue anyways if he does commit to the Venge Cannon all-in, since I need to defend his attack. Of course, because I bought the Blast Forge, there's no reason to go for such an early Venge Cannon. I would just block it with a wall, and that would hurt his economy way too much. So he goes for Animus here. And the reason being, there's Frostbites in this set. And Frostbites are very, very good even with Venge Cannons, because you can threaten to suddenly do like 8 damage on a turn, and then use the Frostbites to freeze his walls, and just break through, kill all his drones. And that's very scary. So seeing the Animus, I actually go for a Cauterizer. And the reason being, I want Engineers to defend against Frostbites. Frostbites are very good against walls and other units with 3 health, but they're pretty inefficient against Engineers, since they can only freeze 1 at a time. So I kind of am just preparing for his Venge Cannon all-in right now. And Elyot goes for Rhino Frostbite, which is to be expected. I go for 2 Tarsiers here because I realized that next turn he can only get 2 Venge Cannons with his 8 green, and I have a little bit of window to build some attack. And if I'm to defend the Venge Cannon all-in efficiently, I'm going to need to put on some pressure so I can eventually kill his Venge Cannons. Otherwise, I'll just be spending all my gold on defense, and the Venge Cannons will eventually overwhelm me. Elyot, of course, goes for another Conduit and then 2 more Frostbites, so he's preparing for his big Venge Cannon turn. With the Conduits, he'll have 12 green next turn, which will be enough for 4 Venge Cannons, which all of a sudden is a whole lot of attack. I do have a window here to go for another Cauterizer, however, and I go for it. With a wall of 10 Engineers, it's going to be at least somewhat difficult for him to get through. The 3 Frostbites are pretty scary, so like Cauterizer here is just better than buying a wall and a Rhino or something like that, since the 4 Engineers will actually provide more defense. Elyot finally goes for the double Venge Cannon, or the triple, sorry, but he's not able to get the 4th one because I'm actually threatening 6 damage next turn with the Cauterizer play, and he doesn't want to lose his Rhino, he wants to still defend. So he uses a green to buy a barrier instead of the last Venge Cannon, and he's able to defend just barely. On my next turn, I attack for 6, buy a Husks. So I buy 2 Husks and a wall, and even though his Frostbite is going to just freeze the wall, eventually he's going to run out of Frostbite supply, assuming he's using his drones to buy the 4th Venge Cannon next turn. So eventually the wall will be able to block, and that's why I go for it. I also buy a Conduit, just in case I need barriers or force fields against his Venge Cannon rush. So I attack for 6, wipe out almost all of his defense. He gets a 4th Venge Cannon, and then buys a force field. Because this turn he'll be able to do 6 damage. After freezing the wall, that means only one of my Cauterizers can attack. So he can just barely defend my 4 damage next turn. So I go ahead and build a wall, barrier, Husks, and his 2 Frostbites can just freeze the 2 walls, but I can defend pretty nicely with barriers and Husks and the Doom Drone, and also of course the Cauterizer. So in this situation, Elyot actually decides to freeze the 2 units that are about to die, and that's correct. Because I have 3 things with 3 health, even if the Frostbites froze 2 walls, I can still block on one of those and absorb for 2 damage. But at this point in the game, Elyot's kind of committed to the all-in. He activates the Venge Cannon ability twice, giving him 6 Gauss charges, but he's unable to actually defend, which means I'm able to kill 3 Gauss charges, buy another wall, 2 Husks, 2 Engineers. I'm sort of just able to hold on here, just barely. By doing 4 damage every turn, and using Husks and walls, slowly, very very slowly, I just grind Elyot out. And the game kind of ends like that. So yeah, that was a very interesting game with a very interesting line of play. By cutting a drone on turn 1, I was able to threaten a very scary early Shadowfang rush, and kind of force my opponent to also cut a drone, and more importantly to commit to green. And once I saw my opponent commit to green, I was able to sort of just do a counter strategy to the inevitable Venge Cannon rush, and I was able to win. But it's not so clear cut, I think. Would there have been a way to counter my strategy without having to cut a drone and going Conduit? Could Elyot have just double droned and then transitioned into some line of play that counters the extremely early Shadowfang with just higher economy and maybe the ability to buy Shadowfangs of his own eventually? I don't really know. And if you guys can figure out some line of play that would just straight up beat my Gambit of going turn 1 drone, then please put it in the comments below. I'd be interested in finding that out. Anyways, that's it for today. I'll see you guys next week.